We're
Oh,
live. We're
good.
live.
I listened back to the other audio, by the way, and it actually sounded really clear. So I think it's just the acoustics in this room are pretty good. So yeah, it should be fine.
Acoustics. What rhymes with acoustics? Anxiety. Do you think it could be a recurrence?
Pound it. Yeah. So you were saying, what episode do you reckon this is? 20?
I'm guessing it's 26. I feel like we were at a milestone of 25, or we were on the
20?
cusp of a milestone or at a milestone. It was one of the two.
22 was the milestone, wasn't it?
Mm,
It
are
was
we
some.
Masons? Duality, the duality number? Is that what we made our milestone?
20,
22.
is it
I,
meant
thought,
to be on?
I think we definitely got to like around 24. So I think it's 25 or 26 today.
Yeah, but we did one on a date that was the same. So it was like 24, 20 on the 24th or 23 on the 20th. I
Did
can't
we
remember.
do 22 for your birthday, maybe?
I don't think we did one on my birthday, but 20,
Oh, or was it around then?
I don't even remember. So, where I was on my birthday. Oh, I was in Sofia. No, I wouldn't have been there.
Oh, okay.
Maybe it was like 20th.
Maybe it was 20. Maybe 20 we did on like a.
Anyway,
But
so
I
for
think,
this
yeah, go on, after you.
UK, I think it's interesting just to talk about the UK and like what we think about it. That'd be quite cool.
Yeah, the UK. See, it's funny because everybody's perspective of where they live is likely, not absolutely, but it's likely to be skewed because that whole better the devil you know kind of thing. Like, there are people who come from like war-torn countries and they absolutely love their country. It's like, I don't know. Let's just give an example. Let's just say somebody from, I don't know, Jamaica, or like, it's like they absolutely have to, like, people will go and relocate to somewhere that's maybe, got like a higher murder rate or a higher crime or a weaker currency, and people will, say, oh yeah, I love this place, and yeah, it's probably like, people are all the people that love it, all the Americans that love America, and it's this absolute cesspit. But like, then at the same time, you kind of see why they like you, and in the culture, it's like you love the culture, the people, and yeah, as far as the UK is concerned, it's like I definitely do love the place. There's something very unique, but it's love hate, because as much as it really is like, that fucking teenage romance. It's like love hate. It's like one day you're best friends, another day you're like, oh my god, yeah, this place fucking does my head in. In fact, I think it's just like females. You can just liken, the UK to, a female. Yeah, has its ups, has its pros, has its cons. Yeah, liable to do your head in. Certain things don't make sense, but you can't beat them. Yeah.
I think it is one of the best. Well, it was one of the best countries in the world. I still think it is.
It is. It still is. Absolutely. Yeah.
Like, look at things from a kind of like, I guess, a kind of passionless, logical German standpoint. Um, in that there is culture in the UK, and everyone's like, well, everything has culture. Well, not really. It's like not every dish has taste. Not every curry is tasty. It depends who cooks it, where it comes from, the ingredients. And I think ingredients you have, definitely the more diversity there is. That's not always going to be a good thing, but for the most part, I think it is. And I think when you think of the UK, or where anyone thinks of the UK, so many things that just spring to mind, from just like the comedy, the sports, the food, whether you think it's shit or not is kind of irrelevant. But there are other countries in the world, if we're to compare, which is of course necessary if we're kind of like looking into, I guess the pros and cons of anything, that just are devoid of certain intrinsic things, or things that you expect to be intrinsic in a kind of healthy society. I mean, there are countries that have stereotypes, and I think stereotypes exist for a reason. And like when you were talking then about just like other people's perspectives and all that kind of stuff, on everyone has like a, I guess, a loyalty rather to their hometown. You can come from a war-torn area, and generally people enjoy going back and seeing their family and their friends, and a culture that's got something in tune to their own. But that are fucking shit, and people don't want to do that. And I can literally think of a huge landmass straight off the top of my head, that is completely devoid of culture, completely. And that's the Gulf states. The Gulf states are so fake and devoid of any culture whatsoever. So I'm talking about Qatar, the UAE, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait. These places are they've been artificially inseminated in the last, actually only probably since the last century or so. It's less for places like Saudi Arabia, slightly under a century. And it's just shithole buildings in the middle of a desert. It's just shopping malls and burkas. And this is another interesting thing. I think we've talked about it before with respect to Asians, but not pertaining to what we're talking about now. But the fact that there's a lot of similarities in other cultures, where there's a lot of differences in European culture. And Asians obviously biologically generally have black hair and dark eyes. And Europeans, obviously there's diversity in terms of like the aesthetics. But going back to Saudi Arabia, it's a similar thing, but not from a biological perspective as such, but just from the aesthetic culture. Every man, like 99% of every Arab man, they will wear the white, I don't even know what the name is called. I used to know. It's like a white like toga, but the Islamic toga. They always wear that. So that's such uniformity off the bat. And then the ladies will always wear burqas, and usually they'll always be black, which makes no sense because obviously black absorbs heat, white reflects it. So everyone is like uniform to this culture. Then you've just got sand everywhere. You've got the same buildings with the same decor for the most part. The same, leads people into like not just lifelong uniformity, but inherited uniformity. And I think what is great about not just the UK, but the UK in particular, but a lot of European cultures, is because there's been such a large amount of change kind of eternally within the continent of Europe. It's created just this kind of mash of different tastes and textures and flavors. Hence why there's so many languages and so many distinct cultures in such small landmass. But when you think of the UK, and you compare the UK to even these places in Europe that frankly still, in my opinion, have more culture than the Gulf states, as one example, I still think we have a lot over other countries. If you take, for example, Norway, right? What's Norway famous for? It's not the people, is it? It's not the people at all. I mean, they've got a beautiful piece of land that's called Norway, and then they've claimed as Norwegian, but land to anyone.
There's no character. There's nothing that you'd say is characteristic. There are no endearing characteristics. Maybe there used to be there was a perception of like, friendliness and, kind of, like this kind of place where there's like low crime and people are kind of healthy, but that's not even really the case. In Scandinavia, they mainly eat like American fast food, and it's extremely expensive as well. But yeah, the most toxic fish in the world comes from Norwegian salmon farms. So it's kind of even lost that kind of green, because before you could tell Norway's it's the place where it's green and, you can go and eat healthy food and, the people are nice and, it's, it's kind of like lost the former two things. Like, I think overall probably the people are still, pretty decent in, Norway, Denmark, Sweden to an extent, but to a lesser extent. But yeah, um, it's very interesting. But back to what you said about the kind of uniformity is that in some ways, because there is, and a lot of that is down to Islam, because Islam is ingrained in the fiber of of the aforementioned states, and that gives the kind of uniformity that sometimes we need here, because here it's like to another extreme where we're extremely divided. Literally, there are like 4 or 5 viable parties to vote for, which just on a political level divides the country, and then there's just so many different, because we support individuality like almost to like a detriment. Like we support weird stuff like people that have psychological issues, and we uphold that and celebrate that on certain days, or people that have like hormonal issues. You know what I'm talking about. So it's like we kind of push the individuality to an extreme whereby like it fractures society, as we've spoken about before on this podcast. You know, literally eating away at what makes societies strong, in a sense of like the nuclear family, and and what that represents. It's like every fucking sword is double-edged, pretty much. It's like every cloud has a silver lining, everything has its pros and cons. It's that recursive loop. It's like it has has angles. Everything has angles, and everything can be looked at in a way, and it's a matter of perspective and taste. But anyway, I'm waffling.
Actually, two things. I'll do the second one first. When you mention the individuality almost
Mm,
becoming a detriment,
yeah.
um, that is exactly, um, aside from being what they want, the irony lies in that it becomes a of uniformity, because the idea of being individual has become almost religious, in the sense that people strive and go out of their way to implement artificial individuality because they actually don't have any substance to their persona, because perhaps the lifestyle is now, well, not perhaps, is orientated very much around Instagram and TikTok, and spending too much time on your phone, not going out, not playing football with your mates, or socializing
Mainstream media.
mainstream for this. So
Yeah. Yeah.
it is in the artificial individuality. But that's another sidetrack we could go down. But the other thing I thought was interesting, you said about you know, societies being, when we gave the example of Norway, pretty decent. Now, this is what's interesting, because at the beginning you also spoke about female, and like, we can kind of correlate the two here, because if you were looking for like a lifelong partner, a friend or a romance or something like that, you have the choice to pick anyone in this world, right, to interact
Mhm.
and especially if you're looking at a woman, the thing that does that you wouldn't really want if you want to stick with them for
I think I know where you're going.
you want something interesting, you want something that's like
Yeah.
really good, or like you would go back to, you go to a restaurant and you see the reviews, it's like, that was pretty decent, like pretty decent. It's not, it's exactly what you expect from a country like Norway or many Scandinavian countries, Germany as a kind of plinth
Hmm.
arena. It's not quite there. It's like they're always tick boxing. They're doing everything they should. They're going to H&M and buying off the mannequin what they think they should be like. They
Mm,
society's perspective should be. It's not an intrinsic kind of passion. It's not an intrinsic decision from their own heart. It's kind of like they're just mirroring an external perspective and consequently what they feel should be done when actually it's not often the case. And that gives them that title of pretty decent, but it's not fucking anything above that. And I think, sometimes, and interestingly, going back again once more to when you mentioned that people can come from war-torn countries, they can come from total shithole places, and many times they return to those places because there's that love, there's that connection. And that's the thing. You don't need, and for me, I can relate to this. You don't need a perfect country. In fact, quite frankly, I would never live in a perfect country. Boring, and that's for me a problem with cultures like German culture in particular, because when you're consistently kind of around, well, consistency, when you're consistently around consistency where everything seems to function as perhaps it should, then the ability to challenge things, to step outside the box, becomes less and less feasible because people lose their confidence because they haven't had context within cultures that are sporadic and where things don't function, people getting shot in the street and stuff like that. Which is interesting because when you think of like creativity, right, you think of, take sports as one prime example.
Mate, you literally just took the words out of my mouth, but go on.
Footballers in the world on an individual basis as well as a team basis, and whether even it's football or just the kind of the culture of it. You think of Brazil, you think of Spain, Portugal. Now, don't get me wrong, you can look at good teams and think, okay, well, Germany's had a good team many, many times in the past. But when you think of flair, you think of Bassonia, you think of the type of shirts that a little boy would want to buy in a sports shop, all the idols throughout history. It's not often that someone goes up to the German sports section as a non-German and buys, whatever their players are called, I don't even know, Schmeichel.
Although he's Danish. He's Danish. I don't know, let's just say Michael Ballack or Tony Cruz, for example, or Thomas Müller. Like, these are like stalwarts of the past 10, 15 years in the German national team. They've won every single trophy in club football underneath the sun. But yeah, they're not like these like passion-driven, like blockbuster players. They're functional, efficient, and get the job done consistently. As you said, it's like literally, it's consistent, it's efficient, it works. Tony Cruz is just like, he literally won every single trophy. Thomas Müller, another example. I can't really think of any more, but they're literally, Germanish. You get Kreuz, Kroos, Müller with the umlauts, which that translates as like, I don't know, like farmer or something like that. But yeah. That's the epitome of current like German football. Even though they are successful reasonably, they'll get to quarterfinals, finals, semi-finals, win the occasional cup. But yeah, absolutely, you're right. And pressure makes diamonds. Pressure makes diamonds. We know this. You've got England, like a small, little shabby nation, but we're scrappers. That's why we've had so many world championship boxers from such a small island. Even places like Scotland and Ireland as well, given their size, because they've got like a scrappy culture. They produce, these people that, that do well in boxing and fighting. Conor McGregor would be like a good example, for Ireland and Scotland. Taylor, he's like a recent undisputed welterweight champion that came from Scotland, and and you had lots of like good individuals. I mean, football's quite an individual sport, so it's not the best example, but lots of great players have been produced by these small nations, and even more by these impoverished nations that also have just a bit more character, a bit more going on in their culture. And due to the UK being like a somewhat of a melting pot, and also through it's interesting because, you know, when you're from somewhere, the influence, at least following the official narrative this country's had on, you know, international kind of history, politics. Um, yeah, it's that in itself, you know, gives, you know, the residents of this country, the nationals, impetus and a certain sense of pride, you know, yeah, yeah, in being from Great Britain. I mean, even like, you know, Great Britain, yeah, the place that allegedly, you know, conquered, colonized, you know, so 70% of the world at one point or at any one point. So yeah, it's a interesting, fascinating place, and it continues to change. The different accents, the different cultures, and the different places. You've got the Cornish people, you know, the Kentish people, the Essex people, people from the home counties like Buckinghamshire and Oxfordshire and Cambridgeshire, and you know, and then you've got people from Surrey, and then obviously you've got Londoners, and then Londoners aren't all the same. You've got South Londoners that are specific, they're a specific breed, West Londoners, East Londoners, you know, Cockney East Londoners are, you know, but they share kind of similar traits with like the South Londoners to an extent. But there's still things that are unique about, you know, all of these different groups of people. Um, yeah, it's a fascinating demographic. It's a fascinating culture. All the different subcultures that we have. Yeah, the trav culture, the yuppie culture, the alternative culture. There's and everything else in between. Then all the different immigrant kind of, you know, populations as well. It's a fascinating place indeed.
A couple of points about that, because I think we've discussed
Mm.
the action. It's always fascinating me how, you know, it's not just the size of the nation, but you know, because of its relatively small size and its large population, you'd expect accents to become kind of mixed and dissolved into like standardized formula over the periods of time that we're talking about. And given that multiculturalism, you know, you'd expect that even more when you look at examples like Australia or New Zealand, and you look at the Maoris or you look at the Aborigines. You know, there is still a distinctly what's the word I'm looking for? Kind of standardized accent. When you hear a Kiwi accent, you can hear a Maori speaking English, and they sound just as Kiwi as, I don't know, a Caucasian from Wellington.
Yeah,
And likewise, slight
absolutely.
tones, but for the most part, Aussie's Aussie and Kiwi is Kiwi. But British English isn't at all. And you know what's so insane? You know, the fact that we've obviously acknowledged that, you know, we've got a large population, relatively small landmass, a lot of industrial, you know, revolution, which obviously set off the kind of the ball when it came to conquering a quarter of the world, if we're to believe the standardized historical protocols. But we won't go. Oh, it sounds like historical narrative, which we won't go into now. But you know, you've got
Mm.
Manchester next to Liverpool, literally next to Liverpool.
Mate, you said the words out of my mouth. 30 miles between the two places, and it's
And
chalk and cheese, literally.
years. And then likewise Scotland, and you've got Newcastle just on the other coast. And what you were saying about the boxing and the fighting, and I was gonna give examples to that. Obviously, like I'm sure our listeners understand this fully, so not to patronize the listeners, but you know, I think what we mean is it's the spirit itself, it's the fighting spirit. It's not
Mm.
act of fighting, it's what creates that. You know, you can be a great fighter and be an artist. You could be a great fighter and become the best electrical technician out there. But to get to that final product, whatever your flair might be, whether it's sports or industry or whatever, it's that desire to fight. And I think that's why, that's the answer to my own question that's always kind of like mystified me with respect to these languages, or these accents rather, existing in the same language form with literally within miles. It's that fight, it's the pride, it's the desire to stick to your guns, and you know, and be honest and true to you know, a form that you believe in. So whereas you have a lot of American, I'm going to use American girls as an example here, on a specific coast, the kind of stereotype of the Orange County girl or the Cali accent, where the young girl will grow up watching too much kind of capitalized TV and come up with it. Oh my God, that like Californian accent, it's like so like that,
Hmm.
and the size of California, it would be one of the biggest countries in the world if it was an independent state, which it pretty much is now anyway within the US, given the crazy policies. But think of the size of it. You've got someone all the way down in San Diego near the Mexican border, and someone all the way up near the Washington border, and they absorb that same accent. Yet, if you took a pin literally and placed it anywhere within California, that's what we're talking about with respect to areas of the UK like Manchester and Liverpool, two completely different accents existing within that pin drop. So yeah, I mean, it comes down to that spirit, and I think it's evidenced by the fact that so many other nationalities enjoy coming to not just England, by the way, as we spoke about earlier in the start. It's not just about the UK. There's a reason why Europe, in particular, is so popular. Italy, France, these distinct cultures, and in huge amount of landmass in the Gulf states, I gave example to earlier. And obviously people realise that, but with a huge amount of landmass, there's still far more, way more people than you'd expect in most of Europe. You'd expect there to be more flair and interest in that region. I mean, we can travel to Spain or we can travel to France literally within an hour or so and we get something completely different. But if you're down in Yemen and you want to travel, somewhere that has that level of difference between your own culture, you literally have to go to Europe to get that. You're not going to get
Yeah.
that from Saudi Arabia or Oman or Yemen or any of these places. Is everything all right, James?
Yeah, and absolutely. Yeah, I was just getting a drink of water because it's extremely hot in the UK at the moment. That's another good
Oh,
thing
well,
about this country. You get 4 seasons. Yeah.
yeah, that's another thought. It's a good point. That's the here actually. I'm in the top floor of this little terraced house that I am staying in at the moment, and yeah, the heat rises because it's like an antique property essentially, and like it's these old wooden floors. And downstairs it's really cool, where the kitchen and like the outside courtyard and all that is. Then upstairs it's literally baking hot, but I don't want to open the window because I'm right in the centre. Yeah, the sound's a nightmare. But anyway, without the kind of like mixing up the kind of the uniformity, I guess, ironically, of our, there is a reason why I was saying so many people want to go to the UK, and it's not just the economic kind of advantages that it brings to live and work. I mean, just from a tourist perspective, the reason people want to visit the UK is not because it's the cheapest place or the safest place or even has the best nature, because frankly, the
Mm.
UK, as pretty as some places may be, has absolutely nothing on France. It has absolutely nothing on Spain. It has absolutely nothing on Italy in terms of terrain and natural wonder. It really doesn't have that much. I mean, in terms of elevation, we've got three famous peaks: Ben Nevis, Snowdon, and the one in Scarfell something, Scarfell Pike in Lancashire or Yorkshire, wherever that is. And yet you go to the Swiss Alps and you'll find so many fantastic peaks. So that's not what draws people. It's the people that draws people. And another thing I thought that was really interesting when we were talking about kind of, I guess, attraction then, and how if you were to look for your ultimate partner, pretty decent, frankly, wouldn't cut it, which is again an accurate stereotype that I'd apply to many Scandinavians in Germany. And if you think of the perfect husband or the perfect wife that people would look for, you could have 10 business accolades, you could have all the money in the bank, you could dress perfectly every morning, all of these things. And frankly, a woman wouldn't look for that, or a man wouldn't look for that. They may marry that because it's that security, it's that safety net.
Mm.
Why people cheat? They always go for the more interesting thing. There might be a 40-year-old woman with a husband. He's in pretty decent shape. He has a great job. He has a great bank account. He has a great car. Everything on paper works a bit like a German or a Scandinavian. On paper, shagging biker with the tattoos from fucking southern France, or I don't know, the Parisian bartender or the Italian waiter or even the British football hooligan. Who knows? But it's going to be something with personality, because that's what people look for. Because, and here's another level, James, that'd be interesting to bring into.
Mm.
Sparked, word intended, by a mention of how we are charged in a video I was watching earlier with Lorf, who's a big YouTube channel who does these interviews. And it's the energy that we get. You get energy, which is almost a self-interest, but we won't have to go into that paradigm now. But energy that people get from interacting with something different and unique. You know, when you do something for the first time, irrespective of whether it's good or bad, there is a reaction to that, a chemical reaction, whether it's fear or lust or love or panic or any of these factors. It gives you something. Living with a German accountant with 1.2 million euros invested in ETFs, who looks all right and has a nice house, isn't going to give you that spark. And that's why
Yep.
we have so many places. No one wants to go on holiday to Gothenburg. No one wants to go on holiday to Hanover. Someone occasionally might have a party in Berlin, but ironically, that's because most of the time it's not really Germans you're having fun with. Sometimes it is, and there is, but
But it's true though. It's true.
it is true. And you know, this is the thing, I guess, to bring it back around to the topic. You know, the UK, and not to like be a crazy nationalist, because I'm not in any way, but objectively, I feel objectively at least, having travelled to some, you know, many places, I can, as much as I don't like living in the UK, I can look at it and think, yeah, there's a lot of very good things there that just outweigh that, you know, that are on the plate in other countries.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, infrastructure is another one, and this is one. It's like literally everything's double-edged. So that, you know, we complain about living in like a, you know, in a nanny state, and you know, being pried upon, but your reticence, I mean, you know, the chance of you getting away with anything here is slim due to, you know, yeah, not as only everyone got a camera, everybody's got Ring doorbell cameras, there's CCTV, you know, in all that the major cities, pretty much every single, you know, main road and, you know, highway. In terms of consumer rights and laws, even though they're kind of taking those away slowly, there's still so much to protect the consumer, which, you know, and actually that's something that's incredibly commendable about these Gulf states, that they don't have tax. I mean, no income tax is like, you know, is massive. Like, kudos to them for that. But yeah, whereas here, you know, I suppose, you know, the tax does kind of go towards yeah, something, at least a bit of it does anyway. At least they pretend, you know, that it does. You know, the kind of the roads sometimes get looked after, and the NHS does sometimes work, and you know, the
They
police
don't have
will solve
to.
some crime, and fire engines, you know, and these sorts of things. You know, overall infrastructure is quite good, but yeah, there's still a lot left to be desired. Yeah, and hopefully, you know, hopefully that improves. Um, but ironically, that gives it like a little bit of its charm, a little bit of its allure. Like, you know, if you're somebody who doesn't like to do things by the book, you want things that will give you a little bit of wiggle room. You know, I want a little bit of wiggle room. You know, it's like everybody, you know, understands, you know, taxes and, you know, what to declare and what not to declare. Everyone, you know, there's like, you know, unwritten rules, like, you know, on tax returns. And, you know, most countries have this. And these things are nice things to have. It's like duality is, you know, is key. It's like everything's about balance. Yes, you don't want anything to be perfect because it'll be fucking boring. And it's nice to have these little kind of like under the table games that are played, you know, just for a little bit of stimulation. It's good for the mind. It's actually good for the soul. You need a reference point. You need to know what bad is to know what good is. You need to experience these things. And that's why a lot of people who live these repressed lives, it comes out in perverse ways, or, you know, in self-destructive ways, because they're living somewhat of a, you know, oppressed life. Like, another thing about these Gulf states that you were talking about earlier on is like this obsession with, like, you know, really expensive, really fast cars and like, you know, because they can't necessarily maybe go out and, you know, be shagging birds like we're doing, you know, like here. They'll express that by, you know, buying like an M3 and driving it 200 miles an hour, doing donuts, and that's their way of flashing their bollocks. Whereas, you know, we're literally, yeah, putting our bollocks and flashing them in girls' faces, who want them flashed in their faces, obviously. Yeah, so, you know, it's just like, you know, at least we have the option to. So it's yeah, it's interesting, like the things that each culture kind of allows, you know, because, you know, obviously the police aren't, you know, locking people up over there for, you know, they know that there's a place where they go and they do their drifting and they do their donuts, and they're all, you know, sons of, you know, sheiks, you know, and this and that, and, you know, no doubt the police, you know, can be bought out there. And that's another thing. Police in the UK are extremely hard to buy. A lady on 30 grand a year, you can offer 100K, and there's a good chance she'll say no and arrest you. Whereas in many other countries, you know, that 100K is buying you freedom from a murder case. So, you know, integrity is like another thing that this country, and I, as funny as it sounds, because we're almost like the chavvy, you know, little runt of Europe, but at the same time, there really is still a level of like integrity that's just like expected, you know, from, you know, from a lot of people, and that's from living in a place that's not, you know, the most economically deprived, and, you know, it allows people to, you know, create more of a sense of morality. Although there's many places in the world that, you know, that are also, you know, very deprived, that also where people have a good sense of morality. That's not necessarily like a defining factor, but there's just something about yeah, though there are qualities even in this. There are moralistic qualities that are still valued in this, yeah, capitalistic society, this capitalistic hub called the UK that we live in.
Indeed. Well, yeah, I mean, that is definitely what, you know, gives culture. And again, not just to, I guess, what we are speaking specifically about the UK, but there's other countries that we could throw in the bag on one side of the fence. And on the other side, we can put Scandinavia and Germany, all that kind of stuff. We could even go into the whole COVID scenario, and, you know, countries that more sizably adhered to the protocols. And they're not all English speaking countries. And it's interesting because it's not even pertaining to characteristics that are closely aligned to one said place. So that was poorly articulated, but for example, Australia was massively totalitarian, and yet it's, you know, it originates culturally speaking from the UK. You know, you would
Mm-hmm.
expect truth there, and, you know, I'm always interested to know what exactly it is that, I guess, binds a certain type, and retains that caste for as long as possible. You know, and, you know, like, it's with kind of, I guess, mass immigration and just a capitalistic development. You know, we're one of the most developed countries in terms of the materialistic realm that there is, but we never quite reached the point of the USA, which is bizarre when you think about it, isn't it? Because, you know, logically, you'd expect a larger country to be more difficult to colonize, for lack of a better word, with whatever materialistic value the state intends to put out there. You know, because, you know, just logically, you have to access each and every place. You know, prior to television and radio, that was infrastructurally, you know, based on infrastructure, and, you know, having to construct roads and railway lines to essentially connect the country. And, you know, for the US, which is such a madly, you know, large expanse, it seems, you know, bizarre how quickly and feasible that was for them to implement. Of course, we know from alternative history that the railroads weren't built when they were supposed to be built. Long, they were already connected, but still, you know, when you think of how different, extremely different the United States is to essentially its origin, which we're
Right.
told, and how they've come from separating themselves from true intrinsic growth. Essentially, they've disconnected themselves, another kind of electrical adjective, I guess, from humanistic kind of, you know, characteristics. They're no longer really join to what I would say makes a human a human.
So, like, in regards to like the first part, America's population's roughly around 300 million. If I'm, is that right? I think. Whoops, sorry, say that again.
Oh, 350.
Oh, 350, right, okay. So 350, and that's split between 50 states. I know all the states are different size, have different populations, but there's 50 states, right? So that works out exactly 7 million per state, because yeah, 50 times 7 is 350, right? So that's less than the size of London per state, because London's like about 10 million on any given day, right? That's like, there's how many people that like kind of like inhabit in London. So I can see how with the whole state system they have out there, and each state has its own governor and governance. You can see how, and you get so many. It's like you'll get like, I don't know, like a musician or like artists that are kind of famous within their state. Everything's interesting really. You have college football and stuff like that. You have things that are kind of scaled down to like state level. Then you got things like that at like national level, and then they kind of get together when they compete at an international level. But I think the state thing, it's like you get people that really identify with their state, and America probably has roughly around seven different accents. So you've got, obviously, East Coast is very distinctive, West Coast is very distinctive. The kind of Midwest accent is distinctive. The Southern accent is distinctive. And then maybe like you've got like maybe there's five distinct. I don't know. I can think of like five, and then there's like maybe like the that people from like the Rockies, like Colorado, Denver, places like that. So
But
I
even
think
that just isn't comparable to the differences you see in the UK accent.
yeah,
You
because
think of
we've
like
got like 10. We've got like Cornish, South London, Scouse, Nottingham is distinct, Ipswich and Leicester is distinct, Birmingham is distinct, um, Geordie is distinct, Bristolian is distinct. Although, to be fair, Bristolian's a bit similar to Gloucester. People in Gloucester and Bath probably have something that's a bit similar, but Cornish is definitely something of its own. Um,
compared to East Coast and West Coast in the United States, obviously we're far, far smaller and, we have that proximity is there. Whereas, they don't have an excuse, if you like, to not have something as distinct or more distinct than what we have because they're so far away. And yet, frankly, it is different, but it's not that different. It's almost like the difference between certain areas of South and North London as opposed to, an entire continent, which it almost is.
I mean,
So
New York to Mississippi is distinct. New York,
that's true.
yeah, it is distinct, but you're right. But overall, the fact that there's only like five, and there's crossover with like everywhere from kind of like Texas to like maybe like Atlanta has even like people in Atlanta have like a bit of like a southern, it's like a bit of a southern kind of, or at
Yeah,
least, or maybe I've got like an untrained ear, but it sounds very similar to a generic kind of like southern accent. But New York is especially is like distinctive. West Coast is then becomes a bit more kind of like generic and preppy and can be applied to everywhere up that West Coast into like the middle, into like the Midwest. Like, yes, absolutely. And then you've got Canadians who literally just sound like Americans, like obviously in the English speaking, not in the French speaking parts, because obviously in like Quebec and places like that, people have this like kind of like weird like French twang. But yeah, for somewhere like so sparse, with the fact that essentially they're in a different land, but they just sound like standard Americans to anyone else in the world. Like the accent isn't particularly different. It's just like a general North American accent. Like yeah. So yeah, absolutely, I agree with you there. But anyway, but back to the point that I think yeah, the ability to kind of yeah, the way they've been able to kind of make everyone instate, I think, over there into such like a big land mass is through the state system and through having everything in house. America's like the land of the land of opportunity, but it's the land of like they have the best and worst of everything. They have like lots of entertainment, all these like amazing gadgets, technology. They have got lots of cutting edge technology, and they've also got like the worst of things as well. So they've got like but you can get like the best health supplements and healthcare over there, and you also get like the worst healthcare over there. It's like they've got like, the best and worst of everything. You've got some of like the most brilliant minds, and you've got some of like, the dumbest people in the world over there. It's like it's a really it's a land of extremes is what I would describe America as.
There's a couple of things we can tie into that you said. So first thing, naming the accents. We were talking about, obviously, we've got like California becomes that generic up the West Coast, if you like, until it hits the mid, and it kind of dissolves and mixes in with that area. What's interesting is, and this is where kind of a conversation might go, what determines a good culture is I don't believe everything's equal, everything's born equal, as we've stated before, but that's why we have a scale of criminality. A murderer is worse than a robber, period, right? And certain cultures, I believe, are worse than others. And the thing is, but this American might be listening to this podcast now, and to them, and they're not wrong, there's accents that are like, oh my God, they're completely different than my accent. What are these British guys talking about? Like, oh my God, I can go to fucking Boston and that's like super different. And I can go to fucking Illinois. And, but what we're saying is, because the problem is it's relative when people live just within their culture and they don't experience other cultures. So, they assume that there is that massive diversity and that expanse of differences, but there's always going to be a place which has more and less in terms of expansiveness. So, for example, someone from the QA that been listening to my comments about the Gulf earlier, they might be thinking, well, we're so different to people in Bahrain, we're so different to people in Saudi Arabia. But compared to, let's say, Chinese and Brazilian culture, the difference between the two there is obviously far more substantial than the difference between Bahraini culture or East and West Coast in the United States. So that's something for a lot of people to take on board. There's clearly larger differences to be had, and therefore, more substantial forms of culture. And another thing, which was really interesting, I think, that we touched on there indirectly, was when you went up and you said, well, Canadians, for the most part, sound like Americans, which they absolutely do, except Quebecians. And this is the thing. If someone asked me, and this might not apply to everyone, but it certainly applies to us, not everyone might know their geography, but these things are pretty basic, so I would hope most people would. When you think North America, excluding Mexico, so let's just think of like, atypically Western North America, European America, Canada, and States, right? Of most distinct cultures within those places. The two that I would say that we mentioned is the Deep South, the Confederate States, and Quebec.
Yeah.
And that's interesting about that is proof in itself that kind of uniformity doesn't breed culture and breeds everything that creates, let's say, opportunism for those that have ill will against the rest of society. Because, like you said, America being the United States, but also we can include Canada, has those extremes of having everything that's great, or many things that are great, and many things that are bad. And this is the thing. Liberalism, I'm linking it in here. Liberalism is what's dissolved what formerly was created by conservatives to try and prevent, at least in theory, an overtaking and an overlapping of so-called democratic values. Because I was thinking about this the other day with the United States, and we've just touched on it here. The United States is, in my opinion, for the most part, one of the most uniform places. And again, as we said then, for such a big country with a relatively small population, an average of 7 million per state, as you brought up, that's no small feat to be able to do that. And what's even scarier and unique and interesting is they actually have a federal system. And I think the federal system is great because the federal system essentially amounts to Europe used to be before the European Union. Lots of cultures in one place, but with many similarities and everyone being able to travel for the most part from place to place. The European Union is essentially what the United States, transition to, where they've got the illusion of federalism, but it's all under the banner of a centralized Congress and Senate, right? And the only places that seem to have that, I guess, aura of persona are all of the ones that aren't proclaimed liberal states. When you think of the most conservative places, both in the United States and Canada, it is French speaking Quebecians and the deep south in the US, extending out to Texas and some Midwestern countries, but all what would be called Republican belt. And I'm not sponsoring Republicans because that's a scam, the political system's a scam, but culturally, it's the conservatives that retain the most truly liberal values. Well, it's the self proclaimed liberals under the guise of what we spoke about at the beginning of fake individuality that end up being concocted into a system guised as individual, when in actual fact, it's the dissolution of true individualism, which is a derivative of conservatism. There we go.
So, so you've got different, like, for instance, you've got like a Labour stronghold in, like, East London, for example, or let's just say Bermondsey. Bermondsey is like a Labour stronghold, but not of this kind of, soppy emo alternative kind of, liberal kind of thing. It's kind of like Labour, stand up for like the working man's, rights, kind of thing. Like, so, I mean, to say that, yeah, conservative, because there's like working class family values and conservative family values, kind of like amount to the same thing. It's like working class people are interested in this LGBT nonsense. They just want, like, kind of like a nuclear family, as do conservatives. But the difference being is, historically, conservatives have served more. Have served the agendas, or served the needs, should I say, of the middle classes more in terms of, tax brackets and things like that. And, hence, in the 80s we had, like, the poll tax riots and all of these sorts of things. It's yeah,
In terms of being, like you said, a perfect example. Labour voters in those areas are actually conservative. So, with my example to the United States, I don't mean
but it depends on, but then you could say, but when I say it's like let's just say democratic. I think when you said democratic values, I think that was like literally hitting the nail on the head, because, as you rightly said, the idea of right and left is fugazi, because there are crossover. There's definitely crossover between the two, and ultimately there's only one right and one wrong. And we know that the Conservative Party have, things in their manifesto that don't make any sense, and the same with Labour. So it's like, essentially, the official like the official choice that we're given, basically moot. It's like they're moot choices. It's just purely about, right and wrong, and because the labels have proven to both be wrong and right. They mean nothing. There's not a good party out of the top main. We're talking about Green Party shills, Lib Dem shills, Labour shills, Tory shills, Reform Party shills, even George Galloway's the Workers' Socialist Party shills, because it's George Galloway, right? I mean, how could he have got to where he got without being, involved in some kind of club that was doing some kind of jiggery pokery where, he had to go to a lodge and had a degree in, in the lodge. So is it possible? Is it possible that George Galloway is not involved with some kind of jiggery pokery? So it's and then you take it to the next level, the most genuine seeming politician of our time, Corbyn. I mean, even then to reach that level of prominence, I mean, yeah. So, on paper, he's like, yeah, a lot of it sounds good. It's hard to find holes actually with him on paper. Honestly, I've done a bit of a dig, but then just common sense tells you, well, I mean, how was he allowed to be so? But then again, you know, maybe he was serving their agenda by proxy unknowingly. And what are your views on Corbyn, by the way? I'm just interested.
The club, it's the same as when we talk, which we do for the audience. We're always sharing things with respect to just normal day-to-day activities. For example, we'll be watching a YouTube video, and classic numerology will appear from someone that isn't of any particular kind of prominence on the internet. Maybe someone with a couple of 100,000 K, maybe someone with less, maybe someone with more. But so many people are completely involved and intertwined within this ritualistic practice of, number wang, as actually the Peep Show would call it. Was it the Peep Show? No, sorry, it was the same actors. I always forget their name that were in the Peep Show, but they had the comic sketch before that. Within that, there was a sketch called Number Wang, and it's all about realizing that if people on those levels are involved in the system, 100% of politicians are, 100% of those people are, of course, complicit. So by default is. But returning back to what we were talking about before, because I didn't mean to talk about political parties, because again, it doesn't mean anything, as we've just discerned. It has no value in that sense. But it's amazing how they have manipulated, what those words actually should mean. And of course, there isn't really a crossover so much, wholly at least, with the United States, as they have slightly different meanings. The blues are supposedly different to the reds, although that doesn't make any sense. But it's what conservatism really is. Conservatism, by I guess a realistic definition, would be like someone that doesn't agree with certain LGBT values, or somebody that in, I don't know, dressing smartly when you send your kids to school instead of allowing them to fucking pierce their nose with a pig ring, or spray their hair blue. That would be conservative value, not allowing that to happen. Maybe doing something for the community, going to church, undertaking a profession that wouldn't involve, I don't know, shooting two gay guys fucking, which would be probably a classic liberal job now. What do you do for a living? Oh yeah, I graduated in gender fucking mythology, and now I shoot fucking gay pornos in Los Angeles. That's the type of job that the average self-proclaimed liberal in the United States has. The self-proclaimed liberal that calls themselves democratic, while simultaneously slagging anyone else off in an undemocratic fashion that disbelieves in what they believe in, hence the LGBT, A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Who, by the way, little side note, Silas posted it on his YouTube feed. They just decided to challenge upholding increased penalties for pedophiles in California. They are voting against increased penalties for pedophiles in California. That's the LGBT. Yeah. So these examples. So when I meant conservatism, I literally mean at base the idea of not pursuing constant change under the guise known as progressivism, which makes people, you need to move forward to win and gain. constant expanse, which is really perfect capitalism. Whether you can look at what people would call colonialism, which is always wanting more, but really it's not real because that's just the intrinsic greed of that ideology. You can be one person and be a so-called colonialist, absolutely, and these people exist, and what they would be called colonialists. Why do you need to own 100 million hectares of land as one individual, which so many individuals do in the US and China? They literally own like 100,000 properties, 100,000 hectares of land just in one state alone. That's a form of, I guess, colonizing, right? But that base wanting more, it's more power. And that's what capitalism is. It's giving power to people that are shallow enough that power is all they want. And these are the people, as we discussed just now, that because they don't have any intrinsic character, they do spray their hair different colors and have 20 different piercings and get multiple tattoos every week and change their job every other day and their political beliefs, because they are defunct of any truth within themselves. And that is capitalism. That's the ultimate capitalism. The guy that buys 20, 50, 100 mansions and 1 million hectares of land is doing it because they don't have anything better to do. They don't know who they are. Whereas the conservative value might just be to keep themselves to themselves. And I think really that's what conservatism is at heart, not politically speaking, but morally speaking, in terms of the
I mean,
character.
literally speaking, I mean, to be conservative, we have what, like, to be conservative, to be reserved, right? So, yeah.
Not with so much soul, not investing, your money on the blackjack table, but putting it in something that has 1 or 2, 3% return. It's still progressing you, but it's not gambling your livelihood and essentially pushing towards a mindset constantly orientated around gain and thus intrinsically capitalistic. Everything, and of course, as we know, everything in masonry and occultism is reversed. So everything that they tell us is progressive and democratic and right, it's usually best to look the other way.
And something they do tell us is to put money in the bank, and that probably is why you should maybe look at other types of investment that give you more back. But it's an example. But then everything has like everything has its cons. So you put money in a bank, you get very small return on it, but you get more security because there's more regulations around banks. You put it somewhere else, you'll get maybe 12 to 19%, but maybe you're not as covered with regulations. It's it's definitely America pick your poison and knowing when and how to strike and with what. But yeah, not to take away from your analogy, I understand what you were saying.
Well, as James said, put your money in a bank.
Put it in the bank if you want it to be safe. If you want it to grow, a bit quicker, you can look at other things. There's there's whiskey, there's holdings, there's there's all kinds. There's IRA. There's different kinds of like high interest options. If you speak to like wealth management company, but there are ways. Asset managers and things like that. There are definitely ways to, if you've got like 10 grand or more just like sitting in the bank, there's definitely it's probably worth taking out some of it and just having a look at ways to multiply it, or you can be reserved and slowly and steadily also can win the race too. Absolutely.
Well, that's but I mean, there's multiple ways to do everything, but to bring the conversation back from hedge funds, asset management, capital gain stuff to, I guess, the topic, which it was the UK. We're obviously the best country in the world. I love how
I would say it's my favorite. It's like I love the place. What I'm gonna say is I love the place, and love doesn't have to make sense. It's just love. You know, you get people that love, fat ugly birds, but yeah, I
And as
but
James said, it's love. But what is pretty decent. It's better than that. And that's why, ladies, if you're listening to this podcast, there's probably no ladies listening to the podcast, you don't go for pretty decent, because pretty decent, as we said earlier, picture it in your mind now, close your eyes, is a German accountant with 350 euro thin aluminium framed glasses who drives an average car with perfect fuel efficiency and lives in a suburb outside of Munich and spends at least 15 to 20 days going through their bills and accounts in paper form and discussing them with you while you're shagging the tattoo artist that works at the Italian pizzeria down the road, because that is what inevitably would happen. So don't be a Germany. Don't put your money in the bank. Be wild, be eccentric, be everything that love is, which is everything that the state isn't. It's always going to be the alternative way.
boom, what a
Bang.
way to go out.
Exactly.
And guess what? 66 minutes and 6 seconds exactly.
Oh,
Uh,
really? I've got 1 hour and 5:33. So I guess
oh,
we're wrapping
really? Okay.
exactly 1 hour.
I get from when we started talking, but not from when you started recording, I'm guessing.
If we end in 10 seconds, I can end it at 1 hour, 6 minutes, and 33 seconds. Oh, no, wait. Yeah, that's when we started talking. But the recording ends in 5 seconds. So let's do it then. All right, everyone. Au revoir, James.
Au revoir. It's been a pleasure.